Joshua Roy, Jiri Kulich, and a lot more prospects are tearing up the AHL right now. We'll talk about a program in the KHL that's working really well with young players, and then we'll end things off with Cole Hutson, Lane Hutson's brother, who's playing really well for the NTDP. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi and joined by Sebastian. And on today's episode, we've got a packed one. We're going to start things off with a bunch of prospects that are tearing it up in the AHL right now and playing really good through a couple games, including Joshua Roy, who's leading the AHL in scoring as a 20-year-old. By 3 points, 3 whole points. Then we'll talk in our second segment about Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod, a program in the KHL, a team that is working really well so far. It's been playing really well. And what's surprising is how often they use young players, which is a major exception to the general rule of the KHL. We'll talk about the prospects they have in their system as well. And then we'll end things off with an update on Cole Hutson, a 2024 NHL draft eligible, who's Lane Hutson's brother, another left-handed defenseman with a bunch of skill. We'll talk about kind of how he's been doing so far and what we've watched from him so far and where we'd rank him this year. All that's coming up in today's episode. But before we get into any of it, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's get right into it with these AHL scores among prospects and rookies. Let's start things off with Joshua Roy, who's just absolutely wrecking it right now. In the last 2 games he played, he scored 7 points. He's up to 11 points on the game. And not only that, but all 7 of his points in the last 2 games have been primary points, either goals or primary assists. Wow. I mean, it feels like every step of the way, Joshua Roy gets counted out. And every time he finds a way to bounce back and show people that he's the real deal and he's talking business. 5 goals, 6 assists for 11 points in 5 games. What have you liked from Joshua Roy so far?
Everything, I think. I mean, he hasn't been perfect, but he's been unbelievably impressive so far. I mean, I think I've been a pretty big Joshua Roy fan since his D+1 season. Like most people, I didn't quite see it in his draft year, but hey, the Habs did, and they made a really good bet with that pick. But I've been a big fan of him ever since. I think my expectations from him have always been a bit more tempered. I've always kind of seen him as capping out as a third liner with limited top 6 potential. And I'm still sticking by that for now, but I'm less confident in that stance than I was previously because, usually a QMJHL player does not start off his AHL career with 12 points in 5 games?
11 points,
11.
2.2 points a game.
2.2 points a game, which beats his point a game record from the QMJHL last season, both in the regular season and in the playoffs. And he was really close both times to 2.2 points a game. But Joshua Roy's been fantastic. I think that his off-puck movement's been tremendous. He's really showcasing his intelligence at the AHL level. And he's weaponizing it to create advantages in the offensive zone to a degree that I hadn't expected for him as a rookie, at least. And he's consistently attacking the middle. He's taking that middle lane. He's getting through pressure. He's protecting the puck. He's waiting until the lane is open to make a play. He's been patient and composed. He's been fine defensively, but it's really been in the offensive zone where his creativity has been on display, which is not something I expected at all from him in the AHL. I thought that he would start out and take more of an approach like Owen Beck is this season in the OHL of kind of doubling down on that on that bottom 6 NHL projection and kind of working on those skills specifically to entrench himself as an NHLer, whereas Joshua Roy is getting big offensive minutes now and is kind of Laval's top offensive player at the moment. And he is, I mean, by doing so, in my eyes, working on a top 6 NHL projection, because that's the style of hockey that he's playing right now. He's playing that skillful, creative brand that
Mhm.
is less so about bringing energy to the game, and more so about putting the puck in the net, which
Yeah,
is really exciting to see because the Habs have a ton of prospects that can fill in a bottom 6 and will do so very effectively with time. But the
they need
top
that
6
guy.
projections are rare to come by, which is true in every NHL prospect pool, but probably particularly so in Montreal. But yeah, it's been a very very strong start for Joshua Roy. But yeah, I'm very excited to see how the season continues because
Yeah,
this current point streak is unbelievable as it is. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. But there are other AHL players too who've been scoring
exactly.
and are also very young and very talented and very exciting players. So, Hattie, who are
Absolutely.
some of your ones here?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with Logan Stankoven, who's a personal favorite of mine and a player I've always believed in. And he's up to 7 points in 4 games with the Texas Stars in the AHL, working really well off the puck, doing all the small things he does so well: the intensity, the effort level, the ability to play through physical pressure, the ability to put the puck in the net, quite simply. But on top of that, there are a couple other prospects, including a personal favorite of yours, in Brad Lambert, who's doing really well, 6 points
Yes.
in 4 games. He's been playing fairly well for the Manitoba Moose, and overall, you're looking at a player who has continued to showcase his ability to translate his skill level to the next level every step he's taken. So I've been really impressed. But Jiri Kulich is the real standout for me, out of the Rochester Americans, and the Buffalo Sabres system. We're talking about a player who, in his draft year, not a lot of people knew very, very well. But immediately after his draft year, you could right away tell this was a player who absolutely deserved to go higher than he did, and he's been really impressive with Rochester. Even though he's only quote unquote got 6 points in 4 games, he's been playing like an NHLer. Everything he does is so translatable. His decision making is so solid, and he's got the skill to back it up as well. His coming out party was at the World Juniors with Czechia. He was the one player on their team that you could trust to do everything, and it's just been up since there. He's been really, really impressive, and I think it's just a matter of time before he's playing regular NHL minutes, perhaps even in a top 6 role with Buffalo, which is saying something. And I just want to give a quick mention to Jeremy Poirier, who not a lot of people believed in, and I'm still on the fence about because his defensive game is a major issue. But Jeremy Poirier is such a gifted offensive defenseman that I think it's just a matter of time before he carves out and forces a role into the NHL. He's got 7 points in 4 games, a goal and 6 assists, and yeah, I mean he's a player that even I didn't believe in his draft year because I had some major concerns. But who's a player you're most excited about in this group that I've just mentioned here?
I'd probably have to go with Brad Lambert, which I don't
Yeah,
think surprises you very much.
not at all.
Brad Lambert's a player that I was very bullish on in his draft year, perhaps a bit too bullish on. I had him ranked third overall, which was
Yeah.
a bit of a stretch. Looking back,
Mhm.
I'd probably downgrade that with hindsight, but uh,
Mhm.
he'd still be easily inside my top 10, and I would have still sprinted to the board to draft him at 26th overall if I'd been the Habs. And he's continuing to kind of just show steady progression. Last season, I thought it was a good call to send him back to the WHL to kind of allow him to play a skill based game and be that dynamic talent that he really is,
Yep.
with the freedom to do so while readjusting to the North American ice surface. Yeah, I mean, moving on from that to the AHL and putting up three goals and 6 points in 4 games. And I don't believe he played much with the Manitoba last year. So
Nope.
it's nice to see that he's not only playing in the AHL now, but producing. And considering there there might be a handful of AHL regulars that are U20 players right now.
Mhm.
And we've covered a couple of them so far in this episode, but I mean Lambert and Kulik are definitely two that stand out here. And yeah, I think Brad Lambert still projects as a really skilled NHL player, likely in a top 6, and he never should have fallen to 30th overall in his draft year. And I'm happy to see him having some success here.
Fully agreed. But that wraps things up for our first segment about our AHL rookies here tearing it up. And I'll move on to a discussion about the KHL's Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod, who are playing a lot of young players in their lineup, and it's actually working very well for them. We'll talk about that right after these messages here at Locked On NHL Prospects. If you like to buy tickets last minute for your games and don't know where to get them, Game Time is exactly the place for you. Game Time has an app and a website that works really well and helps you get tickets at the last minute. I often have a very volatile schedule, so often, within a couple minutes time, I've got the afternoon off and I've got really nothing to do, and I'm looking to get a look in on a game in Montreal. Let's say it's the Canadiens or even the Laval Rocket, and anything from sports, music, comedy, theater events, anything you're looking for in terms of events that require seats. Game Time has you covered. They've got a bunch of interesting options, including you can see the view from exactly where you're buying your ticket. They also have something called zone deals where you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of about 18% savings on those seats. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. They have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even sometimes an hour after it starts, you can still get those tickets. So they're really the best place to find last minute deals. And with the Game Time guarantee, you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less than what you see on Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. The terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Connor Bedard scores a hat trick. Your team wins the Stanley Cup, and you win 100 times your money. These are all possible situations this season if you play daily fantasy hockey with the Sleeper app. With studs such as the aforementioned Connor Bedard and fellow NHL rookies Leo Carlsson and Adam Fantilli entering the league, the NHL is more exciting than ever before. And you can get in on the action by joining the Sleeper app for daily fantasy hockey. Simply track stats like goals, assists, save, plus minus, and more, and you have a chance at 100 times payout from Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details.
All right, so moving on to our second segment, we'll be talking about Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod, a program in the KHL that is switching things up by using a bunch of young players in their roster, and it's working extremely well for them. They're coached by Igor Larionov, who has been revolutionizing a bit the way that that the KHL approaches young players. It's very, very rare that first we'll see this many prospects and young players on a KHL roster, but also just the fact that they've been using them regularly and not just shoving them in as 13th forwards to see them kind of watch the game from the bench. It's very special. We'll start things off with some of the NHL drafted prospects that are in the system. So first and foremost, we have Nikolai Kovalenko, who is a 24-year-old drafted player who's drafted in 2018, I believe, who belongs to the Colorado Avalanche. He's up to 13 points in 11 games in the KHL. The Colorado Avalanche are just unfair with their ability to pick up prospects wherever they can get them, and Kovalenko is no exception. It's very rare that we'll see a player who's above a point per game in the KHL before the 25th birthday not end up in an NHL roster. So I think it's just a matter of time before we see Kovalenko playing full-time minutes in the NHL. It's going to be very interesting. Another player that's a bit in the same boat is Vladislav Firstov, who was drafted by the Minnesota Wild. Those are two players who are a bit older, but their rights still belong to NHL teams. So the one that really impresses me is the fact that the top scoring defenseman on this team is a fifth rounder from the Montreal Canadiens from this past draft in Bogdan Konyushkov. You've watched a bit more of Konyushkov than I have, but I have seen him passing, and I've been really impressed with the offensive game and his ability to track players on defensive transitions. But talk me through a bit more what you like from him and what kind of the details are in this game that make you kind of, feel a bit of promise regarding this prospect here.
Yeah, I mean, he's been their number one defenseman this entire season. And for is he 21 yet? He's either 20 or 21, just barely got drafted in the mid rounds of the NHL draft. Though there was actually quite a lot of hype around him at the draft itself. I know multiple teams were really interested in picking him up and were pretty annoyed when the Habs butted it in front of them in line to get him in the fourth round. And so I was actually quite intrigued by him after the Habs drafted him because I heard so much chatter about him in Nashville. And it did not disappoint. I think that Konyushkov is a really, really intelligent player. He's always composed in possession. He plays the simple passes. He plays with pace. He makes quick decisions. And he's overall just quite decisive with the puck, which is what you need in order to play big KHL minutes. And he is able to play a really composed brand of hockey at a fairly young age, which is very impressive. That said, I don't think that he's an offensive dynamo. Like his 11 points in 21 games, I think, are pretty indicative of his offensive involvement with the team, despite being a number one defenseman and getting quite a few power play minutes with that lineup. He's less of a creator than he is a facilitator. So Konyushkov is a strong passer, but he's not going to go end to end and create something out of thin air. But he's very steady. And as you said, he matches footwork well in transition. He defends the rush well. He's good at angling his body in order to push players into the boards and onto the periphery. He is a decent enough skater. I wouldn't say it's a super high-end asset, but definitely not a detractor either at this point. And as a whole, is a very, very interesting player. And he's going to be in the KHL for another 3 seasons, this year included. And that'll give him a ton of time to kind of just marinate and develop. And I think that the Habs have a definite chance at an NHL player here with time. So as far as a 4th round pick goes, this is a pretty good value just a couple months after the draft to be able to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, we've got 2 draft eligibles that are playing pretty well with them so far.
Yeah.
We'll start off with the obvious one, which is Anton Silayev, the towering 6'7" defenseman who skates better than he should at that size. It's been very much a chaotic sample of viewings so far with Silayev. There are games where he looks like a top 5 pick. There are other games where he looks like an outsider for the first round. But regardless, I think the constant with Silayev is just how able he is at closing gaps wherever they are. He can catch up with players who are 6-7 strides ahead of him going on the breakaway. He can get back on time and get a stick on the puck. With one push, he's able to cover maybe 10-15 feet of ice easily. There's a lot to love about Silayev. He started the season off really hot with a point per game in the KHL through 6-7 games. But since then he's cooled off massively, and he's now at 8 points in 21 games, which I think is more indicative of the type of player that we can expect from Silayev. But regardless, it's not the offensive game that really impresses me with Silayev. It's really the defensive abilities, and it's not like he's relying on his physicality. He's not defaulting to hitting players through the wall. I mean, he's really good at angling players out of position. He's really good at closing gaps, like I said, and especially his stick position, he's really good. But talk me through a bit of his offensive game, because you saw some progress there, right? There were a couple of clips that showed a bit of promise on that side.
For sure. I think with Silayev, the key to his game is movement, and that's true defensively as it is offensively. He covers so much ice, and the key to his offensive game is to use that strength and to leverage it to create advantages in the offensive zone. And he's starting to learn how to do that against KHL competition. I'm seeing him activate off puck, and going into space that his wingers open up for him, kind of taking like cycles around the offensive zone, switching positions with his wingers and being a lot more active. Whereas during his point streak, when it looked like, oh, this might be a massive offensive defenseman, but in terms of the statistics, he was really, really quite static offensively. He stayed at the blue line, and now with having like 20 games of KHL experience under his belt, he's become a lot more comfortable activating offensively. And I think that's a big piece in making him more impactful in the offensive zone. This isn't a player who's going to wow you with creativity or with high-end dynamism or skill, but he is a decent enough puck handler. He's 6'7". He's a very strong puck protector when he wants to be, and he's able to make his presence known around the slot. I'd love to see him kind of cycle around the offensive zone more frequently, because he has that puck protection ability to push off any defenders and kind of like stiff arm them while he's going around the net. Or I'd like to see him kind of making his way into the slot more often, whether he's just passing through in those routes or whether he kind of plants himself down as a net front presence. I think he could be very effective in that. He has good hand-eye coordination. He could be a tipping threat. And just, I think, overall, being a bit more active in that fluid system that Torpedo have building. And one of the reasons that's such an exciting young team is that the coaching allows the young players to play to their strengths, which often is their creativity. And Silayev is becoming more comfortable on that front. But I do agree with you. I think that his defensive game, it really is the crux of what makes him valuable. I don't think that the production at the KHL level is going to indicate that he's going to be a 40, 50, 60 point defenseman at the NHL level. But I do think that there's some two-way upside here to a player that already has a very, very strong defensive foundation. And he's looking good in the KHL. Definitely a lot better than he did at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll close things off very quickly with a player that I don't think either one of us has watched enough to be able to give a full statement on, but Nikita Artamonov has been really good as well. And he's another draft eligible. He's still 17, turns 18 next month, and has been looking really good with 9 points in 20 games in the KHL. I mean, nothing to necessarily, nothing that necessarily jumps massively off the page, but in terms of his NHL equivalency, very few players to this age managed to even play regular minutes in the KHL, let alone put up almost half a point a game. So we'll keep a close look on him as the season goes on and kind of get more comfortable talking about him later on. But that wraps things up for a second segment about Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod. And we'll move on to an update on Cole Hutson out of the NTDP right after these messages here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, that you can spend on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. If you've been thinking of joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so to end things off, we'll be talking about Cole Hutson, Lane Hutson's brother, a player who, they share some similarities, but we'll talk about the differences in just a second. I just want to give you a bit of an update on how Cole Hutson's doing so far in the NTDP. He's played 5 games against USHL competition. He has 3 assists in that span. He's +3 as well with 4 penalty minutes. Overall, with the NDDP against all levels of competition, he's got 8 points in 12 games. That includes some games against U.S. high school competition, but also some games against NCAA competition. So a bit of a mixed bag in terms of level of competition. That's why I often look a bit more at the USHL competition level, because that's a bit more uniform. It's a bit more stable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're talking about a player who, I watched him once in April. Well, I watched him a decent amount of times in April through the Helinka Gretzky Cup and the U18 Worlds and all that stuff throughout the summer. And having watched one game so far from him against USHL competition this year, what concerns me is I don't see much of a difference between my viewings in April and my viewings in October. And that's 6 months of development, 6 months of physical development, 6 months of technical development. Usually you see a bit more of a progression there. But to kind of round out what kind of profile you would get in a player like this, he's a left-handed defenseman, 5'10", 160, plays a lot like Lane Hutson in terms of just the overall dynamism of everything he does, being super creative, super inventive, super out of the box. He's definitely a better skater overall than Lane Hutson in terms of lateral mobility, in terms of backwards mobility and straight line speed. But he's less impactful defensively. He's a lot more risky of a player. Do you agree with that assessment, or do you see do you see any other differences in those two players' games that kind of stand out to you?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the differences between the two brothers may be like the most established things in Cole Hutson's scouting report so far.
Yeah.
Because it's the easiest parallel to kind of draw, because stylistically they are quite similar offensively. They have a lot of the same strengths, and but they are fundamentally a bit different in terms of their play styles, especially defensively in my eyes.
Yeah.
In the defensive zone, Cole Hutson struggles a lot. He is this highly intelligent offensive manipulator, but in the defensive zone, he gets caught by some really simple plays and gets dragged out of position. So he regularly gets kind of drawn in towards the boards, and then a quick pass is made to the middle lane, and he's nowhere to be found. And he is a very strong skater, but he gets caught flat-footed so regularly.
Yeah.
He is often quite upright in his stance at the offensive blue line, which means that when you have a player who puts the puck off the boards and behind Cole Hutson, kind of moving his body weight and shifting that really quickly to try to backpedal doesn't work very well, and it means he gets burned consistently. So his defensive game, I think, could get patched and see a decent amount of improvement with a couple simple fixes. But those are the simple fixes to bring him from like a third percentile defensive player to like a 30th percentile defensive player. I don't think we're ever going to see Cole Hutson be a even like 60th percentile defensive player.
There's no net positive defensive player there for sure.
Exactly. Like he's always going to add value through his offensive game primarily. That said, he does showcase so much awareness, intelligence, planning, composure offensively that I have to believe that the defensive game can grow by integrating those elements with time, because they're there. They just have to be applied in a different area of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And if you add in the elite puck skills, the elite level playmaking, the elite level dynamism, the high end ability as an offensive quarterback, whether it's be at 5-on-5 or on the power play, you have this fascinating player. He has great shooting habits. He has a very good shot already. He's a way more mobile player offensively, especially than Lane Hutson was at the same age. There's so many tools here with Hutson that could with time develop him into an elite offensive player at the NHL level. We're talking about a player that could be a 60-point defenseman in the NHL or more. There is the toolkit to support that style eventually in the offensive zone. In my viewings of him as a D-1, consistently he stood out alongside the likes of Will Smith and James Higgins as the most dynamic players on the NTDP roster.
Yeah.
And that's ahead of guys like Cole Eiserman and Ryan Leonard and Oliver Moore. There's so much to like with this game, but the defensive game is so concerning. There's so many issues with it. I'm a massive fan of undersized offensive defensemen, and even I am like a bit hesitant with Hutson in terms of managing my own expectations, because in the offensive zone, it's almost no notes. He is lights out. He's excellent. But in order to be an impactful NHL defenseman, you can't just have that offensive game. You have to also bring the defensive aspects. Yeah. And calling those works in progress would be an understatement at this point.
Absolutely.
I definitely think he needs at least 2 seasons in the NCAA after his draft year, and that's a pretty conservative estimate too.
Yeah.
Might be 3 or 4, but that's enough of me rambling here. What's your take on Cole Hutson? Because he's a very complex player, and I think the entire debate around him is going to be around weighing the pros and cons rather than debating what his strengths and weaknesses actually are, because it's pretty fancy.
Exactly. The thing is, for me, I'd be a lot less concerned if I saw any difference at all between Cole Hutson in April and Cole Hutson in October. Because like I said, again, it's 6 months of development. Even though half of that is the summer, you're still developing in the summer. You're maturing physically. You're working in the gym, hopefully. I'd be a lot less concerned if I saw any difference at all. I mean, he's the exact same offensive player that he was in April, and he's also the exact same defensive player that he was in April. In one area that's really good, and the other that's really bad. And unless there's some drastic differences in his ability to not only defend the rush, but also identify threats early, get ahead of plays, and use his skating positively, and weigh the risk reward ratio a bit better, he's going to continue to be in kind of my late teens to early 20s. He's kind of probably going to oscillate in that range if he stays the same player all year. I don't expect him to. And even then, like we saw with Lane Hutson, this family seems to be a family of late bloomers. After the draft, Lane Hutson added 2 inches of height, a good 20 pounds of weight. So it's been, a lot of his physical progression happened after the draft. So that's also something to take into account. But even with that, I don't think that Cole Hutson will ever be a net positive defensive player or physical player. It's just about how he balances his strengths with at least a tiny marginal bit of improvement in his defensive game. But as the year develops, maybe he shows some signs of something better. But for the moment, I see him as kind of a 15 to 22 range player. And as we build our rankings at the end of the month with Dauber prospects, we'll be a bit more concrete regarding where players end up. But that wraps things up.
I think I might bump up a little bit further from you. We'll see how that debate goes later this month. But I still have him inside my top 15 because the offensive skill is overwhelming. But
Absolutely.
We'll see how it goes.
For sure. But that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next, and leave us some questions in the sections below. We always read our questions, leave them for our mailbag questions, so make sure to leave that in. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episodes as we continue our prospects content throughout the month of October. This has been Hadi with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next